Nuestro siguiente punto en agenda es la conferencia Creando un País Innovador. El formato será el siguiente. Tendremos una presentación del señor John Kao de 45 minutos, luego tendremos unos 15-20 minutos de conversación y durante esos 15 minutos me van a hacer llegar la pregunta que ha sido seleccionada por el público que está asistiendo tanto en Facebook y en las redes sociales de alguna forma virtual a nuestro evento. Luego presentaremos una disertación adicional sobre el modelo de innovación china. Les pido que demos la entrada al señor Kao con un caluroso aplauso.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be in your country today, and I just want, on a personal note, to say that 50 years ago, my father led a scientific expedition to Machu Picchu to study the physiology of breathing. That was his field. And now I have the pleasure of participating in your expedition to the high ground of innovation. So I'm very pleased to follow in a family tradition with you here this afternoon. I've had many nicknames over the last 25 years that I've been working in the innovation field. And I can repeat most of them to you because they're pretty polite. You know, The Economist called me Mr. Creativity. But the nickname that I like the best, that will perhaps give you an idea of the kind of work that I do, came from an engagement with the US government. After about a year of working with one particular agency, they turned to me and they said, well, you know, you're not quite like most of us, but we understand what you're doing, and we've decided to give you a nickname. You are the Innovation Sherpa. All right. Now, of course, you are a country that knows a lot about mountains. I brought a mountain with me, Mount Everest, different mountain. But when you climb a mountain and you don't have a map, you often need a guide. And the guide hopefully has a map, knows how to get to the top of the mountain. So in my own work, working with startups, with mature companies, with governments around the world, I've been able to put together my own map of how the process works, how a startup, a company, a country really engages with innovation and does the work of innovation. In a way, I'm very clinical because I like to, as I say, move people and organizations from understanding innovation, which is, you might say, getting it, to actually getting it done. You know, just saying that innovation is important gets you a certain distance. But to me, innovation is actually a very specific set of practices. It's actions, it's skills that operate at the individual, the enterprise, and the societal level. Okay? So I want to be able to share some of that knowledge with you today, because when you climb a mountain, you obviously need to have the right equipment and also the right skills. Many countries, by the way, are trying to find the high ground of innovation. I think there are probably at least 50 countries that have some form of a national chief innovation officer, an innovation agency, and a national innovation strategy. You know, our colleagues at OECD have done a great job of documenting what is going on around the world. This is a global movement. So many countries are engaged in the notion of finding this high ground. And I'm so happy that Peru is now engaged in this journey of seeking the high ground of innovation as well. I think my computer might be asleep. No, it's not. We have a mountain, but we want to see the next slide, I think. So it seems to be frozen. I don't quite understand what's going on. Do you know? Oh well, this is speaker nightmare, but I'll be happy to share with you the knowledge anyway, whether we have the pretty pictures or not. So really what I want to do is focus on three basic questions. If there's anything that I can do for you that's useful today, I want to try to get to three basic questions. Okay, great, we're in business. Three basic questions. What is innovation? Why is it important? And how do you do it? All right. I find that the first question is important because, in a way, innovation is the most overused and least understood word, whether it's in English or Spanish or any other language. And I think that there's a lot of loose discussion about what it is. So I want to try to, first of all, be clear about that topic. So I guess one of the questions that I want to ask you first is, what would you guess? I mean, I guess you're seeing it up here already. The whole point of, if you Google the word innovation and you look at the last 12 months and you say, how many times has the word innovation been Googled? It's 2.65 billion hits. That's the good news and the bad news. The good news is many people are talking about it. The bad news is the word is used so often as to be almost meaningless. So the first challenge in relation to these three questions is, how do you create alignment so that government people, private sector people, academics, policy people are all, in a sense, speaking the same language in terms of what is it? It matters very much what the map is that you use for talking about innovation. I don't quite know what's going on here. The whole notion of a map is illustrated in this slide, which is a sailor's map from the 17th century, which shows California as an island off the coast of North America. This is a real map. And many people think California is really an island off the coast of North America, but it speaks to the power of your mental models. So these days, there are many, many different flavors of innovation. I think what I'm going to do is abandon my USB port and just do it this way. Okay, so we have reverse innovation, which is the flow of innovation from developing to developed countries. We have open source innovation, large-scale innovation, which is a term that I invented to talk about innovation at a societal level. User-centered innovation, which is about the bringing together of design principles with the economy of a given society. Digital innovation, a very big topic. How does social networking start to affect the ability of all of us to contribute to an innovation movement within a society? Indigenous innovation, which is China's approach to building intellectual capital within their country, their large country, as a driver of economic and social development. China, as you may know, has announced that they are spending $1.5 trillion on a whole host of New Horizon scientific technology and innovation-related areas. And finally, there's the whole notion of sustainability innovation. Nike, a very well-known company, has essentially merged their innovation team with their sustainability team because they see no difference between the two. So I think you can see here the richness of innovation, but also the challenge, because the word means many different things to many different people. So let me try to just give you some simple definitions. I don't know what's going on here. It feels like there's something is signaling this thing, and it's just telling it to keep going. Or you know, let's just put it on the regular presentation mode. Oh, take it off. Okay, so just go right here. Okay, right here. Click. Here, just double click. There. Right. Okay. So maybe this is going to be better. Okay, so creativity and innovation are not the same thing. We're improvising now, so thank you for being patient. Creativity is our human ability to generate new ideas. We cannot help it. We sleep at night, we get new ideas. We are in a meeting, sometimes we daydream. Our brains are engineered to come up with new ideas, but it doesn't mean that the new ideas have value. So the basic definition of innovation, which comes out of the dictionary, innovation is creativity applied to some purpose to generate value. Now, I thought this was a pretty good definition until I started working with countries and looking at innovation as a societal issue, because frankly, a country is not in the business of just generating profits from developing new products that it can then realize an increase in their stock price and earnings per share from. Societies are in the business of providing for the well-being of their citizens. Societies are in the business of pursuing the human adventure, moonshots. So it matters a great deal what the purpose of innovation is, what innovation is for. And so my own definition, therefore, is a little bit different from the traditional one, which is that innovation is a set of capabilities. It's a set of real skills that allow what? I would argue, the continuous realization of a future that you want, a desired future. It's not just enough to make new stuff that you can sell at a profit. That gives you variety. But societies, I would argue, are in the business of making meaning, of fulfilling purpose. And this applies to individuals as well. Why would any of you get out of bed early in the morning to pursue an innovation agenda if it didn't relate to some idea that you had about something you wanted, something that you dreamt of? And similarly, the vision of a company, we all know, is a powerful engine for driving innovation agendas. And so it should be with countries. In my experience, countries that are sophisticated at dealing with innovation agendas have an answer to the question, what is the purpose of innovation in your country? And a purpose that goes beyond the basics of providing for the economic and social well-being of its citizens. What is the purpose, right? So this is perhaps a slightly different view on innovation. And similarly, I believe innovation is not just about new products. It's about new services, new ways of doing things, new behaviors, new ways of seeing opportunity. And it's not just about science and technology. Science and technology may be important arenas in a society where new ideas are developed. That's certain. But innovation is about taking those ideas from the laboratory, from the people wearing the white laboratory coats, into the marketplace. Now, Thomas Edison was not an innovator when he developed the first light bulb. He was an inventor. And it was only when the light bulb got sold in the millions that you could really say he was an innovator, because he had changed the existing order of things. Right? So there's something about innovation that I think is bigger than science and technology. In the work that I've been doing with various countries, it involves cultural industries, it involves design, it involves national mindset, it involves many dimensions of a country's resources that certainly include science and technology, but cannot be just equated with science and technology. I'm feeling better now about this slide presentation. So the innovation model that a country adopts also very much relates to its stage of, you could say, innovation development. And I think this is an important point for Peru to be thinking about. So 1.0 was, in a sense, the industrial era, the era of mass production, economies of scale, learning curve effects, right? Many of the great enterprises that we still respect today come out of the industrial era. But 2.0, I would argue, is the era of, you could say, Silicon Valley. It's the era of venture capital. It's the era of disruptive innovation. It's the era of the killer app. And this era is also very much with us. I live in San Francisco. I'm right next door to Silicon Valley. I see this every day. It's very much alive. But I think where we are heading in terms of the innovation field overall, if I can use that term, is to a 3.0 innovation that's very much about innovation at human scale, so human-centered innovation. The whole emergence of design and design thinking and user experience is a pointer to the importance of designing and innovating, not because you want to just create a new technology, but because you want to create something that's relevant for people. The revolution in social networking ultimately is about people. The fact that Apple Computer on a given day might be the most valuable company in the United States is primarily based on their understanding of people, of the user experience, of what happens in the magic between the connection of a person with their iPad, iPod, MacBook Air, and so forth and so on. Right? So many countries are grappling with how to be clear about where they are in terms of the evolution of thinking with regard to what stage, what model of innovation they're engaged with. It's also important because I would argue that there's a new point of view on, well, it's not perfect, a new definition of wealth, all right? So in the old days, wealth was based on tangible assets, things that you could pull out of the ground, copper, for instance, or oil, depreciable assets, money in the bank. And this is a view of economics that is certain to continue. But my hunch is that we're going to be entering into an era in which new definition of wealth will become important. And so the sum of the creative ability, the talent of an organization or a society, the appetite for risk, the ability to experiment, that enables the transformation of what is possible into what is valuable. This may be the new wealth. So measured by those metrics, there may be some countries that we think of as being very wealthy that, in fact, if we look at it through an innovation lens, are becoming less wealthy. And conversely, other countries that may be relatively poorer in the traditional asset class, but are able to leapfrog into this new definition of wealth that has to do with building this kind of talent economy, these kind of capabilities for innovation. So how do you build an innovation engine within a society? It's a very interesting question. I wrote a book called Innovation Nation, which is really looking at this whole notion of how a whole country mobilizes around the notion of being an innovative society. And as I said earlier, many countries are grappling with how to do that. So innovation is also complicated to talk about because it operates at multiple levels. Steve Jobs is a very innovative individual, capable of coming up with new ideas. So at the same time, he worked with a talented set of teams. This is the Apple software development team. He has Apple Computer, which is an innovative company located in Cupertino, California, which is an innovative society or part of a society. So think about it. You have to be good at psychology, interpersonal behavior, group dynamics, organizational behavior, leadership theory, macroeconomics, social theory. They are all relevant for looking at innovation. So it's a big canvas of disciplines and issues that are required. I guess what I'm trying to say ultimately is that innovation is not a simple topic. Simply saying, yes, we believe it's important, we want more, doesn't necessarily get you more. What is really necessary is to look at what the different aspects of innovation are that represent opportunities to build capabilities within a society, within a company, and to design a campaign for actually realizing that. We'll come back to that more subsequently. Okay, so one topic down, two more to go. This thing has got a mind of its own. All right, so the second question is, why is it important? This is, I think, also extremely essential to recognize because it relates to what I would call the second challenge, which is how do you create a sense of urgency around innovation? You know, innovation is not like spinach, where it's good for you and the more you eat, the stronger you will be. I think innovation only comes alive, whether it's in your life or in your company or in your country, when you have a sense of urgency that motivates you to actually behave differently. Because otherwise, why would you behave differently? You wouldn't have to. You could just basically, so it's still doing this. Can you help me? You could just stay at home, basically, and do the things that you're familiar with. So I think this notion of creating a sense of urgency is extremely important. And as was said earlier, we live in a period of economic upheaval, turbulence, traditional business models are being stood on their head. So this whole notion of creating a sense of urgency within an organizational culture, but also within a national social environment is, I think, extremely important as an agenda item. And this relates to the question of how. Okay, so I guess we're going to move on to the third topic, which is how do you do innovation? This is actually what I most enjoy talking about, because most of the other dimensions of an innovation initiative are kind of like the hand waving. Well, let's understand what it is, let's understand that it's important. But the real work comes about when you address the issue of how to do it. What do you actually do? If you're a small group of leaders and you're in a conference room and you're doing the work of innovation, what are the activities that actually entails? If you're the head of a government-led initiative on innovation and you get a call from someone and they say, congratulations, you're now in charge of innovation for your country, what do you do? You know, if you're the chief innovation officer of your company, which is in a traditional extractive industry and is trying to reposition itself with new methods or trying to diversify or trying to think differently about globalization, what do you do? Right? So innovation comes alive as a practice, not as a bumper sticker or a slogan. You know, it's as if, you know, I play music a lot, and I've thought a lot about how jazz music in particular relates to the innovation process. And, you know, for a lot of people, innovation would be as if I said to this gentleman over here, I have a surprise for you. You're going to give a jazz concert tomorrow. But don't worry, because I'm going to encourage you, and I'm going to give you the PowerPoint presentation, so you'll understand how to do it, and you know, we'll all kind of make sure that you feel motivated to do it. And of course, unless you had practiced for about 10 years, scales and basic skills, you wouldn't be able to do it. And I believe firmly that it's the same thing with innovation. Innovation doesn't come about just because you say it is important. It comes about because individuals, teams, companies, societies practice it. And practicing it is the hard part. And that's what I think we're here to talk about. So it's kind of like the third challenge. How do you move from understanding innovation, from getting it, to getting it done? And the short answer is it's complicated. There are many moving parts to an innovation system within an organization or within a society. There are many components, so it's complex. You know, and I'm not going to go into all of these because every one of these topics is a talk unto itself. But, you know, just to review a few of them, what is the vision that drives the purpose of innovation? How do you establish the sense of urgency? What is the role of leadership in articulating the vision? How do you create a narrative, a story that makes people motivated to change their behavior? How do you shift the culture of a government or an organization to more risk-taking, to more experimentation, to tolerance of failure, all of which are essential ingredients of the innovation process? You all did not ride a bicycle correctly the first time you had a bicycle. I'm sure most of you fell down, and if you were like me, you probably fell down a lot. Well, so the learning process involves failure, risk, experimentation. It's the same thing with innovation. but how much of the risk-taking and experimentation and failure are permitted in an organizational environment or in a public sector environment with all the accountability that's involved? What is the strategy process by which innovation comes alive within a company or a society? What kind of facilitation or process knowledge is necessary to help people work together more effectively? Where does the work of game-changing innovation happen if it's likely that it will be killed if it lives within the mainstream organization? What is the role of information technology in raising the level of collaboration around innovation? What is the role of the customer? User experience, user-centered design. How do you make investments that have a different risk profile from your typical corporate financial models or your typical government investment models? How do you train people for the right kinds of skills? So as you can see, it's complex. There are many moving parts. And I think the headline that I want to share with you, this may be disappointing, there is no manual that I could give you that would answer all the questions about what Peru should do. Right? There's no three-ring binder with all the answers where I say, okay, I turn to P for Peru, I look, okay, this is what you should do. Instead, you are on a journey. The journey is one of designing the future that you want, designing the innovation system that you want, with all of the uncertainty that is involved. I could make a case, not being an expert by any means on what's going on here, that the treasure for you is not so much in incrementally improving what you have, that's very important, but actually figuring out how to leapfrog from where you are to where you could be in selected areas and applying your resources to developing a portfolio of innovation initiatives at a national level that will enable you to both take care of improvement of existing businesses, but also to have one or two moonshots. You know, opportunities that are unproven, but that might create public excitement, engagement, and ultimately create a tremendous amount of value for your country. Countries out there that are smart about innovation, in my opinion, have a strategy, and the strategy is no more or less than this. We have finite resources, we can only do a few things, we want to do them really well, we want to understand what's going on in the global environment, so we fit into the value chain for innovation globally. So let's then do a strategy process and make some decisions, right? You know, Thailand, for instance, has a national innovation agency. It has a building. It has a staff. It has a director of national innovation. They have 3 priorities: agricultural and food-related innovation, life sciences, and innovation in the area of culture and cultural artifacts. That's their national strategy, and it's based on a sense of national purpose. Well, I mean, that could inspire some thinking here, because I know that those are areas of strength for Peru as well. You know? So there is no country out there that's the textbook, and there is no 3-ring binder. But there is an exciting set of opportunities for all of you in this area. So this is the point. What are the questions that, that are required for Peru to be very successful in the innovation area? Well, clearly one is to decide on a vision of the desired future that defines the purpose and direction for innovation efforts today. And that, I would argue, also creates a global context for the innovation efforts that you do. If there are 50 countries out there already doing innovation, and if there is competition in the innovation area, where can Peru fit into the value chains out there? This transformation of innovation as a global phenomenon is one of the most significant economic and social developments of the early 21st century. You know, for example, it used to be that a pharmaceutical company was a big monolithic company in Basel, Switzerland, or New Jersey. It had a wall around it. It had employees that were signed up with contracts. You had to use a key to get into the laboratory. And everything was vertically integrated, from the people in the white lab coats to the people who were selling you the drugs in the doctor's office and giving you the free pencils. Today, the pharmaceutical industry is a globally distributed affair where the elements of innovation are spread among many countries. So, for example, I know a number of pharmaceutical companies in San Francisco that don't have 10,000 people or 100 people or 1,000, but have 5 or 10 people. And everything that you would identify as being innovation-oriented is insourced from another country. Clinical trials are done in Poland, medicinal chemistry is done in India, various elements of the innovation value chain in the pharmaceutical industry are done worldwide in different locations. So that means that smart countries understand that in the areas they choose to compete in, they will want to be strong in certain facets of the value chain, right? Because it's a new ballgame, globally distributed. And that maybe doing things via the same pattern that has existed historically is not really the pathway to a tremendous amount of value creation, not only in economic terms, but in social terms for your country. Another important question is, do you have a way for disruptive innovation to coexist with the day-to-day? And this is a fundamental challenge both in companies and in countries. What I mean by disruptive is game-changing innovation that you can't really prove is going to work out, that is disruptive of the status quo. And the reason that there's a little skunk here is because one of the models for dealing with disruptive innovation historically has been the skunk works, which was invented by the Lockheed Corporation to put the development of visionary different kinds of airplanes into a completely separate organization that was physically separated and culturally separated. You know, when Apple developed the Macintosh, they moved all of the engineers out of headquarters and into a separate building. There are many, many examples of making skunk works where even in government, you know, EARPA, for instance, in the United States, is a skunk works for energy-oriented innovation. Because it's a truism that the today organization will inevitably try to compete with or even kill the tomorrow organization. Or if the tomorrow organization is the 11th priority in a 10-item list, then you're going to have a lot of trouble convincing people to focus on the new thing as opposed to the existing agenda. So how you, as a country, choose to instantiate disruptive innovation. You know, I would argue there's a white space opportunity for Peru, a moonshot, about which there's probably no consensus today, but which is probably going to contribute mightily to value creation and social development from now to the middle of the century. I don't know what it is yet, but it's part of your innovation portfolio. How are you going to figure that out? Well, that's another interesting question. You know, what is your process for clarifying weak signals, you know, possibilities, emergent opportunities? This gentleman here, you can probably see him, he's got headphones down there, is listening for something, and this is a real picture. He's listening for this, equally antique, you know, but this is the distant early warning system, which is big ear cups into one person's ear. So my question for all of you is, how do you develop big ears for Peru? How do you develop the kind of big ears that allow you to understand emerging agendas, and not just in Peru or in Latin America, but on a global basis? Education, I understand, is a big agenda going forward for Peru. Well, if you go through the normal development cycle of educational institutions, that's one strategy. Another is to understand that education, certainly in first world countries, is about to undergo the same kind of disruption that, for instance, the book and music retailing industry went through with the advent of the internet. So Napster and Virgin Megastore, Amazon and Borders Bookstore, You know, I mean, there's disruption of the playing field. There will be similar level of disruption in education. Why shouldn't Peru jump on some of the new models for distributed education that involve technology and networking? And how would you go about doing that? Where would the big ears be placed within Peru to help you think about where those opportunities were, and then what would the capabilities be internally to start thinking about how to do that? Well, these are, I think, the important design questions that need to be addressed in terms of Peru's innovation agenda. Then there's the whole question of who's going to do the work. Okay, this is fundamentally important as well. I mean, you have in a given organization or society, you know, just to make a big overgeneralization, 3 levels. You know, you've got the senior person, the head of state, the CEO, and they've got to say it's important and provide some support for this, right? But they're not going to do the work, right? They're going to enable the work. Then you've got everyone in society, you know, all of us, the whole kind of, you know, social networking phenomenon. And ideas are going to bubble up, and they need to bubble up, and it needs to be possible for them to bubble up. But the entire citizen population of Peru is not necessarily going to do the work either. So the question then becomes, who's doing the work? And this is what I refer to as the question of stewardship. Stewardship meaning, who's going to take responsibility? And this is very complex because in every society you have public sector, you have national and regional and local public sector, you've got private sector, you've got NGOs, you've got universities, you've got experts, you've got civil society and citizens. And somehow they've all got to come together in a kind of collaborative understanding around what innovation is, if it is to be a national issue, as opposed to just a program within government with some innovation people who are doing some innovation work. I mean, that's important also. But I think the power really comes when this begins to capture the public imagination and when there are bridges of collaboration that occur among the different players. So the middle level, you can't quite see it clearly, but it's the coalition of stakeholders, is the big question for stewardship. Who is going to do the work? Who is the multidisciplinary team, let's say, that's the middleware of the whole system, that has certain authorities and certain resources that will be able to basically carry forward and make this work come alive, make it happen, so to speak. So every country has a different approach to doing this. Some are successful, some are less successful. This is, I think, currently a big opportunity and also challenge for Peru. Who's going to do the work? It can't just be one designated, you know, head innovation person, because it has to embrace all these different sectors of society. But then it begs a lot of questions. Well, how often are they going to meet? Who's in charge? Who calls people up to invite them to come over? How long do they have a mandate for? Do they have a budget? You know, what are the expectations? You know, what can they say publicly? You know, all of these kind of things. And it's exciting because you have a kit. You have a kit of possibilities to create all of these pieces of an innovation system and to make it come alive. But you have to make sure that it happens. I've already talked about having a sense of urgency, and this involves telling a story. What are the consequences for Peru if you don't do it? What's the upside if you do? You know, exercising a little bit of the Hollywood imagination. Then there's a question of resources. You know, do you have the fuel needed to actually do the work of innovation? And it's not just money. It's also time. It's freedom, right? If you want to do big things, you've got to be thinking about the resource question, which again means that you may need a different approach to organizing and distributing resources from a typical capital allocation model that exists in a government or in a company if you want to get results. I mean, one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is so powerful as a model is because there's such a high level of trust that people are willing to write big checks based on a handshake and based on deep knowledge of the other people. You know, this whole notion of how you fund new things so they can take off is a big challenge. The early stage venture capital model is essential, but then the question is, how does it get modified? How does it come alive within a Peruvian context? You know, if you don't have the capital to start new things, they're not going to start. But then the question is, again, back to the issue of culture, what level of failure, what level of risk are you willing to tolerate, and so on. The most important ingredient for a national innovation agenda. And I believe the most important element of Peru as an innovation nation will be finding an answer to this last question, which is, can you find the mental white space to take what existing mental maps you might each have individually and put them aside to try to imagine what might be possible in Peru? So how do you get to what Buddhists call the beginner's mind, or a mind that is free of preconceptions? Because to be able to go to that point is to be able to start the innovation process. And I'll just end my formal remarks. We have some time now for discussion and Q&A here, but you have a picture of a teacup. And this is my favorite innovation story of all. It's a little bit of an odd one, so you'll have to follow me along. But there was a gentleman in ancient Japan who wanted enlightenment. So he went to the local temple, and the priest there said, "You're not ready. Come back in 10 years. So this gentleman was very embarrassed, but because he was very compliant, 10 years to the day he came back. And again, the priest said, "You're not ready. Come back in 10 years. So I'll make this very quick. You know, he was old. He came back. And this time, the priest said, "You're ready. Come on in. What took you so long?" And our hero can't believe his luck. So he goes into this elegant little room, and the teacher says, "I have one instruction for you. Hold out your teacup." So he holds out his teacup. The teacher pours tea into the cup. The tea fills up the cup, goes up to the edge, spills over the edge of the cup, keeps pouring, more tea spills, until finally there's a huge liquid mess on the floor. And in that moment, this gentleman achieves enlightenment. Now, you're not supposed to interpret these stories. You're supposed to meditate about them for 20 years under a palm tree. But, you know, since we're in Peru and we're postmodern and you're a fast audience, I'll give you a little bit of interpretation. The cup, in my view, is our map. It's our point of view. It's what we're able to know. Inside the cup is all the knowledge that we have, and outside the cup is everything else, the knowledge that we don't have. And it's often the knowledge that we don't have, but would wish we had had if we only knew what it was, that is the most valuable knowledge of all. So this pertains to the notion of innovation experts, about which I believe there are few, if any. The Buddhists say, in the mind of the expert, there are many opinions. In the mind of the beginner, there are few opinions. And therefore, all new knowledge begins with beginner's mind. Okay? So to be able to take out that piece of white paper, to be able to imagine a Peru 10, 20, 50 years from now with an innovation strategy, a stewardship process, a culture of innovation that is equal to the phenomenal history, the phenomenal assets, the phenomenal vitality of your society, in my view, would be a dream come true. So I wish you very good luck on that journey and look forward to following your great progress. Thank you. Can I have some headphones? Thank you. You know, I'm usually a very technology smooth guy, I must say. So today's been a little bit of an outlier. So please forgive me for all of the technology issues. But now I can speak Spanish.
Muchas gracias, señor Keio. Realmente somos privilegiados porque estamos al inicio del CADE. Entonces, en nuestra conversación de esta tarde podemos dejar algunas inquietudes o tareas a las siguientes sesiones y paneles. Así que en ese sentido, me encantaría que compartiéramos algunas inquietudes con total candidez sobre cómo aplicar estos conceptos tan generales. Me encantó la diferencia entre creatividad e innovación, que realmente muchas veces confunde a la audiencia no tan imbuida en el tema. tal vez uno de los primeros temas sería, ¿cuál es el rol que el Estado debe de cumplir? ¿Qué rol de liderazgo? ¿Qué tipo de liderazgo? ¿Qué líder necesita un país para decir, vamos a ser un país, una nación innovadora y envolver a toda esta gente que habitamos y que queremos tener un país diferente en esta aventura y esta ruta de transformación?
So I think the role of the public sector in innovation is extremely important, and it obviously will vary from country to country. It's only really in the United States that we have these theological debates about whether government should have a role in innovation or not, because if you're more on the right wing of the spectrum, you would say, well, government shouldn't interfere, it's the invisible hand, maybe you did Chicago School of Economics. Most of us, I think, understand government sets policy. Government creates standards for education. Government funds science. Government does large public infrastructure projects. Government does procurement. And government can do more in terms of setting up innovation agendas that have to do with science, with design, with culture, et cetera. So government definitely has a role. The question is, what's the balance between government's role and the rest of society? Failure modes would be a government that says, we know it all, we're going to do everything, we have the smart people in our ivory tower, and then they don't make use of all of the creativity and knowledge in society. Well, that's not particularly good. So finding, again, it's a stewardship question. The other question about leadership is, obviously you need leadership. Leaders are the ones that allow organizations and societies to transform and take a leap into the future, right? So basically, a leader has to give the people courage that there is a good result at the end of something new, and has to be able to take risks and authorize new initiatives, and has to be able to give people confidence that they're on a good path. They're, as I said earlier, not going to do the work. So in Finland, for instance, the Prime Minister of Finland in 1991, Esko Aho, was a transformational leader for innovation, because when Finland's economy went like that, when the Soviet Union disappeared, because 25% of their foreign trade disappeared like that, Esko Aho said, well, we can't do everything. Finland's small. We're going to succeed at three things: science, education, and innovation. So he was the innovation prime minister. No Esko Aho, no Finnish, innovation agenda as we know it today.
Ahora, todo este movimiento completo de innovación requiere obviamente no solamente de los stakeholders Estado, sino también de empresa, de los centros de investigación, de los ciudadanos en general. Eike Batista, uno de los más destacados hombres de negocios de Brasil, si no el más en este momento, sugiere que las empresas inviertan 10% de sus utilidades en acciones de innovación. ¿Qué opina usted de esto?
So I think that it's a great idea, and the whole idea that you have to reserve something in your budget, whether you're a well-established company or a country, is a really good idea. And there's certainly models of countries with large amounts of natural resources and extractive industries where a certain percentage of that is required to go into new areas. I would not, however, necessarily say it should be 10% or 5% or 8% until I had gotten much more specifically into a country and its opportunities. But the idea of setting aside a national innovation capital pool, provided that other smart things are done in terms of getting smart people to manage it in connection to a smart national strategy, is, I think, extremely important.
Ahora, nada de esto podemos hacer sin desarrollar talento, inteligencia, una educación de calidad o de la más alta calidad. ¿Cómo dar un salto disruptivo en educación en nuestro país cuando hemos visto nuestra pobre performance en las pruebas de PISA? Y no solamente esa, ningún indicador en el caso de educación es positivo hacia nosotros. Inclusive algunos esfuerzos, como podría ser el ir desarrollando a las élites de menores recursos económicos, pero de mayor potencial intelectual, estarían viéndose actualmente un poco opacados, refiriéndonos a lo que es el colegio mayor. ¿Cómo trabajar élites en educación? ¿Es esto lo que, esta es una forma de crear ese gran cambio?
So if I were providing an opinion on this, which I guess I am right now, I would say, first of all, you have to say that education is a priority, and that transformation of education is a priority, and that it connects to the national innovation agenda, so that there's kind of a connection among these different agendas, and they're not just little chunks within a random collection of government and societal agendas. Then I would use big ears, okay? I would get a commission of 15 or 20 of the top education, technology, business innovation types to look at education innovation models around the world. I would look at what's going on in the United States with the marriage of social networking and Internet 3.0 on the one hand and education at the other. I would look at the online education models that are beginning to really break out, because it's not just about putting content online and asking questions, but actually creating learning communities where people link together and where the relationship between students and teachers is utterly transformed by new kind of social platforms. So what I'm saying is it's important to take the existing system and improve it. There's no doubt that that has to be done. So more teachers, a better relationship with the teachers' unions, whatever it might be, more infrastructure. But I would also say that there is a disruptive innovation play, which is the other track, which is trying to deeply understand what's going out there and saying to yourselves, no country is an expert at next-generation education using digital technology. Why couldn't Peru be in the front ranks? Why couldn't Peru actually turn? Okay, so this is a very important point. Reverse innovation refers to the ability of innovation to flow from developing to developed countries. We see this in healthcare, for instance. GE has 300 healthcare projects in rural India. Why? Because rural India is really poor, but it's rich in one thing, which is problem ownership. Seriously. And if you think about the innovation process, owning the problem and being able to experiment is a valuable asset. Here, you own a problem, which is how do you get a distributed, high-quality education experience regardless of socioeconomic status, and how do you lever technology? So you are in a position to do 50 experiments that the whole world would be interested in, right? You're in a position to go to the 5 top online learning companies, mostly in the United States, and say, we want to do a set of national experiments. And we have a national innovation agenda. We want to link education and innovation. So this, again, finally and ultimately relates to the stewardship question, which is, who's going to do this work, right? If you have a couple of part-time people who spend 5 hours a week, it's not going to happen. This requires real work, just like playing the piano requires real practicing. But at the end, there's the potential of huge results.
Todos estos elementos, el Estado, la educación, la empresa, son importantísimos para la creación de lo que usted en su libro menciona como polos de innovación o hubs, como se refiere también. Y aquí viene la pregunta más votada por nuestras redes digitales, y es, ¿cómo crear estos hubs en el Perú? ¿Será acaso una región maravillosa y riquísima como lo que es Cusco, que hoy nos acoge un hub a desarrollar? Habría que ver cuál es el propósito. ¿O será acaso la selva peruana, que hoy nos presenta una riqueza maravillosa, pero que además es una riqueza estratégica si pensamos en el mundo de las futuras décadas? O tal vez el Océano Pacífico, del cual solamente extraemos parte de su riqueza, pero que aún no conocemos la maravilla que puede ser en todo lo que es medicina, alimentación y, en fin, el mundo del futuro. ¿Cómo crear un polo?
Well, so first of all, I want to just quickly make a distinction between clusters and hubs. Cluster theory is well established and primarily is about taking an existing set of assets and trying to figure out how to make them better. But to me, a hub it's just another word, but it encompasses this notion of disruptive innovation as well. So when the cluster experts went to Bilbao and said, do more light manufacturing because you need more of that, that might have been a more incremental innovation approach, but when somebody said, spend $150 million building the Guggenheim Museum, so spend $50 million on the building, which nobody had ever seen a building like that, spend $50 million on titanium panels, which would wrinkle as soon as they saw the air, and $50 million on pretty strange art. This was their game-changing play. That turned Bilbao into a culture, design, innovation, creativity hub that has had dramatic impact on the trajectory of the whole city. So when I talk about hubs in my book, Innovation Nation, it's really to say, well, first of all, you inventory what the assets are. So you think, well, okay, Cusco, proximity to globally significant cultural environments, burgeoning tourism industry. What can we build on top of that? But then also, how could we reimagine the whole cultural industry, right? There may be other parts of Peru where there are other assets that can also lead to the development of hubs. And also, this innovation council that I'm now imagining you're thinking about setting up, which would have representation from all these different elements of society, might think about one moonshot. You know, well, let's make this part of Peru, for example, our education moonshot, city, region, state, you know, whatever. And we will provide the resources because the conditions are favorable there, because the problem ownership is so significant and is so valuable. So that's an additional level of thinking strategically about how to make innovation come alive.
En corto, porque ya estamos casi fuera de tiempo. Si usted tuviera que darnos un solo consejo a los peruanos, ¿cuál sería su primera recomendación?
Oh, that's easy.
¿Por dónde comenzamos? ¿Por dónde comenzamos?
So the advice I would have is to believe that you can write the book and you don't have to just go out and read the book written by other people in the innovation area. Okay? Which then leads to all the other challenges I mentioned about who's going to do the work, how are you going to develop the strategy, what are the moonshots, et cetera, et cetera. But once you believe that you can write the book and that you don't have to just read it, then I think it sets you on a different path. So I'm going to be around for the rest of the day, and you know, I recognize that, you know, through a combination of this one-to-many format plus the somewhat psychedelic aspect of the slideshow, there may be some points that we've not fully discussed. In fact, I'm sure there's, you know, this is really just scratching the surface. Every one of these topics could be a one-hour keynote in a sense. But I will be around. I'd be happy to talk with you. I'll be at the cocktail reception, and I really would like to learn from you about what you think is important in terms of the Peruvian innovation agenda, because I see a very promising future for the work and for the expedition that you're now on. So, thanks again. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Mucha gente en el Perú piensa que somos un país fraccionado, una sociedad fraccionada. Yo creo más bien que somos un maravilloso país con muchísima diversidad y que más bien no encontramos todavía el propósito que usted nos invitaba a definir. Muchísimas gracias por su presentación y su estadía en nuestra ciudad. Muy amable. Un fuerte aplauso.